Welcome to Bible Lesson 102. Today we're going to talk about Nehemiah. So we left off where there were 50,000 Jews that had traveled to Jerusalem or Israel, from Babylon. But remember, not every single Jew traveled back to their hometown or their homeland. So it had been now 60 years since the temple was rebuilt in Jerusalem. And now they were concerned about having walls around the city in order to make it a safe city. So they wanted to go ahead and make walls around the city so that Jerusalem would be protected from those on the outside. So in those days, a cupbearer to a king held a very honored position. He was in charge of serving the king his beverages. His job included tasting the beverage before giving it to the king, so that if the beverage had poison in it, the cupbearer would become sick or die, and not the king. This honored position of a cupbearer was only for those who were the most trustworthy and loyal to the king. Such trusted servants often became advisors to the king. Nehemiah had the high honor of being the cupbearer of King Artaxerxes, the king of Persia, the son of King Ahasuerus, Xerxes, whose queen was Esther. One day, Nehemiah the cupbearer heard some distressing news. His brother came back from faraway Jerusalem and reported that the city of Jerusalem was in a sad state of affairs. Although the temple had been built, the wall that had once surrounded the city of Jerusalem was still in ruins, and thus the city was unsafe to live in. So he reported that the Jews were constantly being threatened and intimidated by their enemies. So in those days, if a city had no walls, bandits, looters, and even thieves could steal and could kill at will, and enemy soldiers could get in and destroy the entire city. So people would not live in the city if it did not have walls, because the city was never safe until the walls were built around it. So thus Jerusalem was an empty city, even though the temple was in the middle of it. As Jerusalem needed walls around it, so it is important for us to have walls of protection around our lives if we are going to be true to God and stay pure from the wickedness around us. Walls in our spiritual lives are the standards and commands that God gives us to live by. For example, if you decide you're going to obey your parents as the Bible commands, then that decision is like a wall in your life to keep out all the evils that come from disobedience and rebellion. So the devil wants you to be rebellious and he will tempt you to rebel. But as you remain firm in your obedience to your parents, your obedience is a wall to protect you from Satan's temptation and from many, many evils. We could say that the walls are made up of such stones as obedience, honesty, truthfulness, purity, church attendance, prayer, Bible reading, unselfishness. When all these stones are joined together, they make a wall of great safety for our lives. So Nehemiah understood how important this was. He knew that God's people needed to have walls around their city in order for them to feel safe. And he began to pray earnestly about the situation far away in the land of Israel. As he prayed and fasted, he wept over the condition of Jerusalem. He addressed God, Lord God of heaven, the great and terrible God that keepeth covenant and mercy for them that love him and observe his commandments. Nehemiah knew that the God of heaven and earth is all powerful and that nothing is too hard for him. And he remembered God's good promise to those who obey him. So in his prayer, Nehemiah worshiped God and confessed the sins of his people and his own sins. He acknowledged that he was a sinner in need of God's forgiveness and that he did not deserve God's mercy. He also reminded God of his promises to the Jewish people and bring them back from their Babylonian captivity, which God had done. Nehemiah also reminded God that the Jews who had returned to Israel were his people. So Nehemiah then asked God to give him favor in the sight of this man, referring to King Artaxerxes, whom he served as cupbearer. Nehemiah knew that God was powerful enough to give him favor before King Artaxerxes. After praying earnestly about this matter for 4 months, Nehemiah knew he had to act, or he had to do something.